I always knew I was destined for the kitchen. From a young age, I felt drawn to the sound of knives chopping and the sizzle of hot pans, the way flavors could transform a simple dish into a masterpiece. I worked hard to make it into the culinary world. It wasn't an easy journey. There were countless hours spent working for free just to learn, sleepless nights prepping for early morning shifts, and endless rounds of criticism that thickened my skin. But I pushed through. And then I made it. I finally landed a position at Le Grand Fourneau, one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city. It wasn't glamorous at first. I was on the lowest rung of the ladder, doing prep work, taking care of deliveries, cleaning, but never really cooking. For months, I watched from the sidelines, observing the head chefs as they commanded the kitchen, waiting for my chance to show that I could stand among them. I did everything that was asked of me. No complaints, just focus, hard work, and dedication. Then the pandemic hit, and suddenly, half the kitchen staff was out sick. That's when I got my break. Chef Julien, the head chef, finally let me work the line. And I nailed it. After my first night on the grill, he pulled me aside and said, "You've earned your place here." I could feel the weight of those words. In our kitchen, respect wasn't given, it was earned through sweat, precision, and resilience. I had finally gained his trust. I was one of them now. At Le Grand Fourneau, we prided ourselves on being the best. Everyone in the kitchen knew their place, knew the hierarchy. But outside of work? That was a different story. There was one person who made my long hours bearable: Susie. She was a waitress at the restaurant, and from the moment I met her, I felt something click. Susie had this energy about her, this carefree, effortless charm that balanced out the intensity of my life in the kitchen. We started talking after shifts, sharing cigarettes on the back steps, laughing over the day's chaos, and slowly, those talks turned into something more. We became inseparable. I found comfort in her, a warmth that I didn't get from the heat of the stoves or the sharp edges of the knives I worked with every day. She grounded me. For the first time in a long while, I felt balanced. But love, I soon learned, didn't always mesh well with the brutal politics of a kitchen. Our relationship didn't stay hidden for long. And when it came out that I was dating a waitress, some people had opinions, none of them good. The kitchen was its own world, and so was the front of house. You didn't mix the two. Chef Julien didn't say anything at first, but I could tell from the glances, from the comments the other cooks made, that something was brewing. The walls between the kitchen staff and the waitstaff were starting to crack. It started off small. Chef Julien and the restaurant's administrator, Isabelle, began having disagreements over trivial things: how the orders were timed, whether the dishes were plated too slowly, whether the waitstaff communicated well with the kitchen. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it. Every restaurant had its issues, but the tension escalated quickly. The kitchen and the waitstaff began turning on each other. What started as minor annoyances, snide comments, passive-aggressive behavior, quickly turned into an all-out war. Cooks deliberately slowed down orders for tables served by the more difficult waitstaff. Waiters, in turn, made careless mistakes on purpose, sending dishes back to the kitchen with small, pointless complaints. The battle lines were drawn. You were either with the kitchen or you were with the front of house. And as a chef, my allegiance was supposed to be clear. But then came Susie. She had nothing to do with the war, but she was being dragged into it. I could see the stress eating at her every time she came to pick up a dish from the window. The other cooks made snide comments about her, treating her like she was part of the enemy camp. I could see her trying to brush it off, but it was hurting her. And I hated it. One day, things went too far. Marco, one of the more reckless cooks in the kitchen, decided to pull a stunt. He told all the waitstaff that the restaurant was closed for a sanitation day, and that they didn't need to come in. The truth? The restaurant was very much open, and Marco thought it would be hilarious to watch the kitchen run without the waitstaff. By the time Susie and I came back from a short weekend getaway, the chaos had already started. We walked into the restaurant, only to find the kitchen laughing and joking around while the dining room was packed with customers, and no waiters. Susie was the only one who had shown up, completely unaware of what Marco had done. She was running around the restaurant, her face flushed, struggling to take care of an entire room of customers on her own. The sight made my blood boil. She didn't deserve this. She hadn't done anything wrong. Without thinking, I jumped in to help. I started taking orders, delivering food, doing whatever I could to support her. But it wasn't long before the kitchen noticed. The other cooks sneered at me from behind the line, whispering to each other. "You're a traitor," Marco spat as I passed by. "You're one of them now." I ignored him, too focused on helping Susie. But the damage had been done. In the eyes of the kitchen, I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. By the end of the night, I knew I was in trouble. The kitchen had its own code, and I had broken it. Chef Julien called me into his office the next day. I could feel the tension the moment I walked in. "You betrayed us," he said, his voice cold and sharp. I was stunned. "What are you talking about?" I was helping Susie. She couldn't handle the floor by herself. Chef Julien's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand. In this kitchen, we are family. We stick together, no matter what. The waitstaff is not your concern. You turned your back on us the moment you stepped out there to help her. That's not loyalty." I tried to argue, tried to explain that I had only stepped in because it was the right thing to do, but Chef Julien wouldn't hear it. "There's no room for betrayal here," he said, his voice final. "You're done." And just like that, my career at Le Grand Fourneau was over. I had spent years working to earn the respect of Chef Julien and the rest of the kitchen staff. I had sacrificed sleep, social life, and countless hours just to prove myself, and now it was all gone. Not because I had made a mistake in the kitchen, but because I had chosen to help someone I cared about. I left the restaurant that day feeling hollow. The culinary world was small, and my firing from Le Grand Fourneau quickly became the talk of the city's restaurant scene. No one wanted to hire a chef who had been cast out for betraying his kitchen. It didn't matter that I had done it for love. To them, I had broken the code, and that was unforgivable. Susie tried to comfort me, but there was an unspoken tension between us now. I didn't blame her, it wasn't her fault. But every time I looked at her, I couldn't help but feel the sting of what I had lost. My dream of becoming a head chef, of climbing the ranks in the culinary world, was slipping through my fingers, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I had thought I could have it all: love, success, respect. But in the world of kitchens, loyalty wasn't just expected, it was demanded, no matter the cost. As the weeks passed, I started to spiral. With no job and no prospects, I found myself sinking deeper into resentment and bitterness. I blamed the kitchen, I blamed Chef Julien, I blamed Marco, but most of all, I blamed myself. I had made a choice, and now I was living with the consequences. That's when I started to notice the cracks in my own morality. I had always believed in doing the right thing, but now, without my job or my sense of purpose, I began to question what right really meant. Susie and I continued seeing each other, but the guilt and frustration were tearing us apart. I began to resent her, even though I knew it wasn't her fault. The love that had once felt pure and uncomplicated was now tainted by the weight of what I had lost for her. And then came the final blow. One evening, after weeks of struggling to find work, I walked into a new restaurant downtown, hoping to get a fresh start. I was desperate, any job would do. But as soon as I stepped through the door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, sitting at a table with another man, was Susie. They were laughing, talking quietly, her hand resting on his arm in a way that was all too familiar. I stood frozen, watching as the woman I had sacrificed everything for moved on, as if what we had meant nothing. It hit me like a punch to the gut. I had lost my career, my place in the kitchen, and now I was losing her too. Susie saw me before I could slip out. Her eyes widened, and she quickly pulled her hand away from the man's arm. But it was too late. The damage had been done. I didn't know you'd be here," she stammered, her face pale. I couldn't even find the words to respond. I just turned and walked out, feeling the weight of everything crashing down around me. The realization of how far I had fallen hit me like a ton of bricks. I had lost everything: my job, my reputation, my love, and for what? I had chosen to go against the kitchen's unspoken code, believing that love could transcend the rules of our world. But I was wrong. The world of the kitchen was brutal, unforgiving, and above all, loyal. I had broken that loyalty, and I was paying the price. As I sat alone in my apartment that night, staring at the empty space where my career used to be, I wondered if I had ever truly understood what it meant to be part of a kitchen family. Months later, I found work in a small, run-down diner on the outskirts of town. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't what I had dreamed of, but it was something. I had learned the hard way that loyalty in the kitchen wasn't just a concept, it was a way of life. And breaking that loyalty came with consequences I wasn't prepared for. As for Susie, I never saw her again. She moved on, found another job, another life. And I was left with the bitter knowledge that in choosing love over the kitchen, I had lost both. The world of restaurants is harsh. It doesn't care about your feelings, your hopes, or your dreams. It only cares about loyalty. And once you break that, there's no going back. The diner where I ended up after everything fell apart wasn't exactly what I had imagined for my future. It was a far cry from the sleek, cutting-edge kitchen of Le Grand Fourneau, and it certainly wasn't where I thought I'd be after all those years of hard work. The smell of greasy burgers and fried potatoes hung in the air, and the floors creaked with every step. But at that point I was grateful for anything. It was a job, a second chance. I was done sulking about how things had turned out at Le Grand Fourneau and with Susie. If there was one thing I learned in this industry, it was that you couldn't survive without persistence. The diner was called Millie's Eatery, a hole-in-the-wall joint on the outskirts of the city that had clearly seen better days. It catered to truck drivers, blue-collar workers, and the occasional group of late-night regulars. The clientele wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. At first, I was hired as a line cook, doing basic prep work and flipping burgers on the grill. It was a far cry from the intricate dishes I used to plate at Le Grand Fourneau, but I wasn't above it. I couldn't be. I kept my head down, focused on the food, and did my job without complaints. But there was a hunger inside me, an itch I couldn't ignore. I had lost everything once: my career, my pride, even my relationship. And now, all I wanted was to prove to myself that I still had what it took to succeed. The head chef at Millie's Eatery was an older guy named Charlie. He had been running the kitchen for decades and had pretty much given up on the idea of changing anything. To him, the diner was a place where people came for cheap, quick food. Nothing more, nothing less. He didn't care about the art of cooking or the innovation that came with it. At first, Charlie didn't give me much attention. I was just another cook in his kitchen, flipping burgers and frying up eggs. But as time went on, I started to experiment with the ingredients. Nothing too crazy, but little touches here and there, spices, sauces, presentation, small improvements that made a difference. At first, Charlie didn't say anything. He watched from the side, grumbling to himself, but I could tell he was curious. One night, during a particularly slow shift, I decided to take a risk. I made a dish completely off-menu, something simple but refined, a perfectly seared steak with garlic butter and a side of sautéed mushrooms. It wasn't fancy, but it was miles ahead of anything we usually served at the diner. I brought the plate over to Charlie and slid it across the counter. "What the hell is this?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Just something different." "Try it," I said, holding my breath. Charlie took a bite, and for a moment I thought he was going to spit it out. But then, to my surprise, he nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "Not bad," he grunted. "But we're not some fancy French bistro. This is a diner. People come here for burgers, fries, and coffee." "I know," I said, "but that doesn't mean we can't elevate it." He didn't respond, just stared at me for a long moment before turning back to the grill. I thought that was the end of it, But later that night, when the dinner rush slowed down, he pulled me aside. "You think you can handle more than burgers?" he asked, his tone skeptical. I nodded. "Give me a chance, and I'll prove it." It wasn't easy. Charlie was old school, stuck in his ways, and convincing him that the diner could be more than just a greasy spoon was going to be a challenge. But I had already lost too much to give up now. I started small. The next day, I took over the specials board. Every diner had one, but Millie's specials were boring: meatloaf, spaghetti, the same uninspired dishes that had been served for decades. I decided to change that. For the first special, I made a simple yet elegant herb-crusted chicken with a lemon beurre blanc sauce. I kept it affordable, using ingredients that were already in the kitchen, but I elevated the flavors. To my surprise, the customers loved it. Charlie didn't say anything at first, but I could tell he was impressed by the way customers were responding. People started coming in just to ask what the day's special was. Little by little, I introduced new items to the menu: creamy risottos, gourmet sandwiches, fresh salads with homemade dressings. Before long, word started to spread. The regulars who had been coming to the diner for years began bringing friends and family, excited to see what new dish was on the board. And soon, new customers, people who had never set foot in Millie's eatery, started showing up, curious about the food they'd been hearing about. But it wasn't just the food that was changing. The entire vibe of the diner began to shift. The staff, once used to the monotony of their jobs, started to take pride in what they were serving. Even Charlie, the grumpy old head chef, began loosening up. He still barked orders and cursed under his breath, but I could see the spark of passion returning to his eyes. Within a few months, Millie's eatery was no longer just the dingy, forgotten diner on the edge of town. It had become the place to be. People loved the unpretentious atmosphere mixed with the elevated menu. The fusion of classic comfort food and modern techniques gave the diner a unique identity, something no other restaurant in the city had. The local newspaper caught wind of the changes and ran a feature on "The Little Diner That Could." It was a glowing review, and soon we were packed every night. People were lining up outside, waiting to get a taste of the daily specials. With the success came challenges. The diner wasn't designed to handle the kind of traffic we were now seeing, and the kitchen was small. But I was determined. I worked closely with Charlie, updating the kitchen layout, bringing in more efficient equipment, and hiring new staff to keep up with the demand. Every night we pushed harder. The kitchen became a battlefield once again, but this time it wasn't against each other. It was against the constant rush of customers eager for something new. Even Charlie couldn't deny the success anymore. One night, after a particularly busy service, he pulled me aside and said something I never expected to hear from him. "You're one hell of a chef," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "This place wouldn't be where it is without you." I could feel the weight of his words. It wasn't just a compliment, it was acknowledgement. I had earned my place, and for the first time since leaving Le Grand Fourneau, I felt like I had truly found where I belonged. With success came new challenges. We were making money hand over fist, but that kind of success didn't go unnoticed. Soon, other restaurants started paying attention, and not everyone was happy about the competition. One evening, after a packed dinner service, I received an anonymous note slipped under the door. It was a single sentence, written in sharp, angry letters: "You're not the only chef in this town." At first, I brushed it off as a petty threat from a jealous rival. But over the next few weeks, things started happening that I couldn't ignore. The first incident was a health inspection, a surprise visit that found minor violations that weren't there the week before. Someone had tipped them off, but I couldn't prove it. The next issue was the delivery orders. Key ingredients started going missing or arriving spoiled. I suspected sabotage, but I didn't have any solid evidence. I was learning that success in the restaurant world didn't just come with praise. It came with enemies. As I navigated these new challenges, something unexpected happened. One evening, after a busy shift, I saw a familiar face walk through the door: Susie. It had been months since we'd spoken. After everything that had happened at Le Grand Fourneau, I didn't expect to see her again. But there she was, standing in front of me, looking both nervous and relieved. "I've been hearing about this place everywhere," she said softly, her eyes scanning the packed diner. "I had to see it for myself." I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was still angry at her for what had happened, for moving on so easily after everything I had given up. But another part of me was proud. I had made it. I had turned my life around. We sat down at a corner table after the last of the customers left, and for the first time in months, we talked. Really talked. About everything. About the betrayal, about Le Grand Fourneau, about how our lives had taken such different paths. "I never thought you'd end up here," she admitted. "But this is incredible. You've built something amazing." I couldn't deny the pride swelling in my chest, but there was still an ache, a reminder of what I had lost in the process. As months went by, Millie's Eatery became a staple in the city. We had gone from a rundown diner to the hottest spot in town. Charlie and I worked side by side, and the bond between us had grown stronger with every service. What had once been a kitchen divided by mistrust and old habits was now a team, united in their love of food and the desire to give our customers the best experience possible. There were still challenges. Rival restaurants trying to undermine us, competition from new spots opening up around the city, but we held our own. We had something no one else could replicate: heart. I had come from nothing, had lost everything, and had rebuilt my life from the ground up. And now I stood tall in my kitchen, not just as a cook, but as a chef. The past was behind me, and the future was mine.